Ready? Good morning. My name is Jack Gartner, for those who don't know me, and I've been a resident for 6 months at Forest Duke, although I've been coming here for many, many years because of the OLLI classes we used to have here, and a number of friends, I would be a guest here, so I'm very familiar with the Forest Duke in many different ways. And I have the pleasure of introducing Bill Sandifer, who's the Executive Vice President and Chief Development Officer at RDU. Bill has had more than 36 years in aviation, consulting, and airport management, and he's presently the Chief Development Officer at RDU, in charge of, if you've seen the flyer we had on the program, Chief Development Officer for planning, construction, design, and sustainability, environmental sustainability for the airport. And this is a huge project that RDU is undertaking. I met Bill some years ago when I was teaching my classes at OLLI on how airports work. And he was Chief Operations Officer at the time. And he was able to take our classes out to the airport, do a presentation, and go through the terminals and get behind the ticketing and gates and take the classes out onto the runways and taxiways. Of course, everybody said the class was great because of the tour, and they've forgotten my teaching the classes and for the other 9 weeks of the classes. Anyway, that became definitely a highlight. So we've been friends and colleagues ever since that time. And when I proposed the idea, after I moved in here, of making a presentation to our group, he accepted immediately, both enthusiastically and ready to go. And so I'm here now to present Bill Sandifer, and I hope you enjoy the presentation. But just one other thing, I really want to compliment and thank Emma and Ajay and Amari for all the help and guidance, having never done anything like this before here, and they've been terrific to work through. And I hope they are somewhere around to hear what I just said, but anyway, here's Bill Sandifer.
Thanks, Jack, and good morning, everybody. Can you hear me? Is this thing still on? I'm going to do this. Can you hear me this morning? That'd be perfect. I'm going to step away from the podium. I don't like podiums. But good morning, everybody. Thank you for that kind introduction. Maybe a little bit more background so you kind of know where I came from and what I do. I came to RDU in 2014. Before 2014, I was the global aviation leader for a consulting practice. I've done airport development projects in the Middle East, in Asia, Central and South America, the Caribbean, Alaska, and Hawaii, and most states in the US. And airports are my passion. Developing aviation infrastructure is my passion. I don't know if I'm proud to say this or not, but I'm a 2 million miler on Delta. Been all over the world. I mean, that has its pros and cons, right, in terms of air travel. Air travel can be very, very exciting and fun, and it can be a difficult experience, right? And I'm sure we've all done that. Part of what I want to do today is not only talk about RDU and our infrastructure and what's coming, maybe give you a peek behind the curtain in terms of what an airport does, what it is, what it doesn't do. And I will tell you right up front a couple of things that an airport doesn't do. We don't fly airplanes. We don't handle your luggage. We don't check you in. We don't make burgers. We don't sell you a Coke. We don't sell you a paper. We don't do any of that. We own infrastructure. That's what we do. We own runways, taxiways, buildings, parking lots, and all the infrastructure in between. And we lease it we allow folks to use the infrastructure to manage their business. So if Delta loses your luggage tomorrow, don't call me. I can't do anything about it. I would like to, and I've been in that situation, but we're really, if you go to South Point Mall, there is a mall developer that owns the infrastructure, and they lease their facilities to private businesses. That's exactly what we do. One of the only distinctions is it's a different industry, right? The other distinction is, which I get into the presentation, I'll tell you a little bit about how we're structured from a governance perspective, a little bit of history, some of the legalities around what we can do and what we can't do, some of our interactions with the federal government, which I will tell you at this point in all of our lives and the history of air transportation can be very, very challenging from an airport operator's perspective. But I could probably stand here for 10 hours and talk to you about an airport. Jack gave me 30 minutes. So I'm going to give you a snapshot, right? And what I'm going to ask of you is, if you have a question along the way, whether it's relevant or not to what I'm talking about, please ask. I'll certainly share with you what I know and my experience, and trying to avoid opinions here and there, but certainly having been around for a long time, we all have those, right, in our lives. So I've got if I can get to it, here's my agenda. I'm going to talk a little bit about history of the Airport Authority, some of which you may know or you may not. Going to give you a little bit of financial snapshot of what we do, and it may be surprising to you in terms of how we generate revenue, how much we spend on an annual basis, what we're putting into our capital program right now, and at least for the next 8 to 10 years. And talk about economic impact, which is critically important to Central North Carolina. A little bit about air service, which I suspect, who's flown in and out of RDU? That's why you come to RDU, right? You come to RDU to get on an airplane. You don't come to pay us $50 to park and then walk away. You come to get on an airplane, to go somewhere else. That's really the value, and what we sell is time. I'm going to talk about what I'm responsible for at a very high level, show a couple of videos and some of the challenges that we have, and then some key takeaways. But again, along the way, please ask questions. I'm happy to answer anything that you've got. So with that in mind, I'm going to ask you all a question. If there's something you've always wondered about an airport but were afraid to ask, what would that be? Yes? And the question was, who designs the airport? Very good question. There are specialty architecture and engineering consulting firms all over the U.S. and international that specialize in airports. What's different about an airport than a mall or a college campus or a different type of industry is how people are processed, how people interact with the infrastructure. And there are experts in the business, and I was one of them when I was responsible for a consulting practice who would plan the infrastructure. It has to function a certain way. And then depending upon the owner's budget, you would design a box that's very basic, or you would design a Taj Mahal. And it's everywhere in between. So there are expert consultants that do that. The consultant that's designed most recently our major renovation of our new Terminal 2, which most of you probably have seen, Fentress, world-renowned aviation architect, and we've got architects that do a bunch of other things for us. So thank you for that question. Yes, ma'am. Yes, thank you for that. So the question was, as you've traveled, you very rarely go to an airport that isn't under a constant state of construction, and what causes that? And that really is an excellent question, and let me explain it this way. Infrastructure, when you build it, isn't permanent. It needs some constant state of what I call renewal and replacement. So perfect example. I'm going to show you, we're building a new runway. And we're building that new runway because the existing runway has reached the end of its life. It was opened in 1986. It'll almost be 40 years old. We're doing some replacements, which you will find fascinating when I show you the video. But infrastructure ages, and as it ages, you need to improve it. You may need to expand it to accommodate more passengers. You need to upgrade it. It gets tired. There's a whole host of reasons. And what I like to tell my colleagues and my boss and my team is From the day we decide to do a project at RDU, you can bet it's going to take you 5 to 7 years to get it done. And let me tell you why that is. And why that is because it takes time to budget for the project to get it approved. It takes time, believe it or not, to go through a federally mandated environmental review process to get it approved. And then you have to design it, and then you have to bid it. We have statutory requirements in North Carolina that require public bidding. And then you have to construct it, and you have to commission it. All that time, depending upon the project, takes typically 5 to 7 years. We went into construction on our new runway in early 2024. It took me 7 years to get through the federal environmental process before we broke ground. So it seems like it takes forever, but I will guarantee you, especially in an airport like RDU that's in a constant state of growth, you will be in a constant state of development, right? Hold on, there was a back here first. Yeah, so the question was the role of the FAA. The Federal Aviation Administration is responsible for air traffic control throughout the U.S. domestic network. That's theirs. We have nothing to do with it. So from the moment you get on the airplane and the airplane starts to move, they will have communicated with the FAA air traffic control folks to get that permission. Then you get to the runway, you take off, you get into the en route airspace structure, you land. That's all FAA. We have really nothing to do with it. Although we do have a really good operational relationship, because what we do on the ground really impacts, or vice versa, what they do, right? So it's a symbiotic relationship between the two, but they're not our employees. Go ahead. Sure. Question was, I don't know if you're talking about RDU, but I think you said any given airport would have a limited number of gates. Yeah. And then what's the process we use to allocate those gates? I'm gonna talk generically, and then I'm gonna tell you what we specifically do at RDU, because some airports do it differently. Some airports have gates that are controlled by the airlines, meaning the airport made a financial decision to enter into an agreement with, say, Delta, for 10 gates. Delta has exclusive control. Delta builds them, Delta finances it, Delta operates it. It's the airlines. Other airports, like RDU, we take a different business model. And our business model is, we call it common use, meaning, and there's some variations that I won't bore you, I can put an airplane on any gate at either terminal at any time because we own all the infrastructure. We own the computer systems, we own the jet bridges, we own all the infrastructure. All the airline has to do is bring the airplane. That's all they got to do. And what that allows us to do, it allows us to avoid an anti-competitive situation where one airline controls the gates, and allows us to maximize the utilization of that infrastructure. So it's a better financial deal, I think, for an airport. That's how we function. That's how the airports always function, and we're not changing. Because what it really does, it gives us the ability to avoid major infrastructure developments. If you have one airline, as an example, that has 10 gates that may only use 10 gates 10 times a day, it's all that unused infrastructure sitting there, essentially waiting. We use it, we maximize it. Now, how do we go about doing that? We require the airlines, all of them, believe it or not, all 20, and we have 20 airlines right now, 60 days in advance of the date that they want to use that gate, they have to give us a schedule. And we take that schedule and we plot it in our computer system, and we allocate gates to certain airlines about 30 days in advance. Now you would think, you would hope, in a perfect world it works, right? I will tell you it doesn't. So it's a constant evolution of managing expectations, putting the airplanes where they need to be at the right time. How do you manage conflicts? Our ops team has gotten pretty good at that, and it works very, very well for us. Now, I will tell you, there are challenges with that, and the challenges come from, give you a little bit of a fun fact, between, say, 4:30 a.m. in the morning and 8:30, about 35% of the traffic, the daily traffic at RDU, leaves. So that's what I call a huge departure peak. right? Whole bunch of folks come into the airport, whole bunch of folks leave. And then airlines come back, same kind of thing happens midday, and they leave. Airlines come back mid-afternoon, happens again, they leave, airplanes come in at night. So you get these huge departure peaks. And when you have these huge peaks and you only got a small amount of real estate, you have to allocate airlines to that real estate. That becomes a challenge. It really does. Yes, yes. I'm going to take 2 more and then I'm going to move on, or I will never get to my presentation. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, they are. The question was, can I talk about runways and the climate effect on a runway, and are they constructed differently in different climates? The answer is absolutely yes. They are definitely constructed differently. I'll just give you a simplistic example. Runways in the Middle East, they're all concrete because asphalt melts in high temperature, right? So interestingly enough, here at RDU, we have an asphalt runway, which is our short runway, and a concrete runway. We are rebuilding our concrete runway as concrete. I think what we'll do is when we rebuild our asphalt runway, it will likely, assuming we can afford it, be built concrete. There is a material cost difference between those two types of pavement, and what we have our engineers do, and it varies, again, by location. You may do it different in Alaska or Iceland or somewhere else versus South Florida, but they really do a life cycle cost analysis based on the material that's available in your local market to really decide what's the best investment. But in our climate, they both work for us. A typical concrete runway, you'll get a 35 to 40-year design life, and that's what we've gotten on our concrete runway, our main runway. Asphalt's about 20 years or less. So there are some material differences between the two. Thank you for that. One more, and then I'm going to get to my presentation. Yeah, so the question was, parking's a big part of our operation, and you're absolutely right. I'm going to show you here in a second how big that actually is. And sometimes we get blamed, criticized. Folks think that we're kind of a roadblock for transit in the local community that doesn't come to the airport. How do we feel about that? Well, I will tell you, mass transit has to be a solution at RDU. It has to be. But the reality is we're not in the mass transit business. So you've got, we like to explain the story. I mean, there's a mass transit system in Raleigh, there's one in Durham, I think they're still called Go Triangle, and there's multiple different types of transit options. Somebody needs to bring that group of folks together and come up with an organized community mass transit solution. That's not the airport, right? We're not in that business. Oftentimes, right, wrong, or indifferent, some folks would want to put us in that business, but that's not us. You know, interestingly enough, if you've parked in one of our economy products, we run our own little mini transit system, right, to and from our parking lots, but that has nothing to do with anybody other than trying to get people from our terminals to the parking lots. But I will tell you, I'm going to talk about one project here in a second. Mass transit has to be a solution because our infrastructure long-term can't support anything other than that. It's got to be a solution, and the community's got to figure it out. Okay, so let me thank you for that. So great questions. Thank you, everybody, and don't stop asking. But let me kind of get into it. So, back in the late 30s, there were some. I'm assuming I wasn't here, but I'm assuming that there were some leaders in our local community who looked at aviation kind of holistically and what was happening in terms of growth, and they decided we need an airport in this community. And I think they made a very forward-thinking, a very wise decision in 1939 to create this thing called the Raleigh-Durham Airport Authority. So in the context of state statutes, the Raleigh-Durham Airport Authority is what we call a special purpose unit of local government. Special purpose unit of local government, independent authority. And it's in the theory behind having an independent authority, although it doesn't necessarily work all the time in practice, is you're somewhat insulated from local politics, and you are allowed or authorized to run an airport. That's what you do. And honestly, that's what we do. When it was created in 1939, believe it or not, the legislature, as part of the Enabling Act, authorized 4 political jurisdictions, Wake County, City of Raleigh, City of Durham, and Durham County, to establish this independent authority. And they each appointed 2 members to a board, which we currently still have, an 8-member board that really is the governing body for what we do. So policy decisions, contracts, things of that nature that have to be approved by our governing body go to our board. Now, when the legislature created this thing in 1939, they said, you 4 governing bodies, you need to contribute annually $12,500 a year, kind of as seed money for the airport authority. Guess how much they contribute today? $12,500 a year. So that, if I do the math right, that $50,000 pays for about 15 minutes of operating costs. So totally different, but that's kind of beside the point. But when they created us, they essentially said, you have to be a self-sustaining business, which I'll talk more about that in a second. But one of the things I wanted to put up here, that picture right there, that was the first airplane that came in and out of RDU and scheduled passenger service. That was Eastern Airlines. That actual airplane is hanging in the Smithsonian today. So if you're ever there to see it, it's actually hanging there. Now, y'all probably like me, you're a student of history. What happened in 1941, the world changed, and the federal government came in and really took over from the airport authority and built the infrastructure, which was the foundation for what we have today. It was a flight training facility for the U.S. Navy up until about 1946, and then it transitioned back to the airport authority with facilities and infrastructure to allow civilian use. And that was not unlike what happened in many other major metropolitan areas in the U.S. That were dedicated to the war effort. So when the airport authority took it back, it really began its infancy of what really is this thing called Raleigh-Durham Airport Authority going to be. And the powers of this board, quite simply, are to own, construct, maintain, expand, improve what I call the core infrastructure of what we do as an airport, generate revenue, right? One thing that the airport authority does not have is the power to tax. So we absolutely run a business like a private enterprise because we don't get tax revenue, other than the $12,500 we get from the 4 local units of government every year, and we still do get that check. Now, I'll show you here in a second a little bit more about, we do get grants. We do get grants from the federal government, we do get grants from the state, and I'll talk about that here in a second. But the airport authority, in terms of its authorized powers, is really, within its jurisdictional boundary, its own sovereign. City of Raleigh doesn't control anything. Wake County doesn't control anything, although, believe it or not, most of the airport sits in Wake County. Wake County has no control over the airport authority at all, with one exception. They appoint 2 board members. That's all they do. And the airport authority controls all decisions from there. So I talked about the board members. I talked about kind of operating like a business. It's quasi-governmental. Right? We tend to think entrepreneurial in terms of our decision making. I will tell you, we are very conservative in terms of our decision making. We're conservative by nature because running an airport is an inherently risky business for a lot of different reasons. So what that tends to create in professionals in this business is being risk averse and being very conservative in your decision making. So what that translates into, believe it or not, is we have about 425 full-time employees that work for the airport authority in a variety of positions, from law enforcement to firefighters to security officers to maintenance personnel to our guest experience, marketing, engineering, planning, all across the board, and quite a few contract positions and part-time employees for us. Compare that to the rest of the population in terms of employees at RDU, which is probably just north of 5,000. So So we're a very, very small component of the total employment generated at the airport. So very, very small component. Again, remember, we're just maintaining infrastructure. That's kind of what we do. So I'll translate that into the financial snapshot. This is our fiscal year budget. And our fiscal year runs from April 1 to March 31. And when our board approved it in March of this year, they approved a $524 million budget. You're going to see the expense side here in a second. So, sir, to your point, look at parking. I mean, parking, at least in the context of this pie chart, makes up 20% of our revenue. So if you do the math, parking is a $100 million business for us. I like to tell folks we're a very successful parking lot operator that just happens to run an airport. And we take 100% of the revenue that we generate. Obviously, it's I'll show you in a second. It's going to go to pay salaries and expenses of utilities and things like that. But we take the excess revenue and invest it into infrastructure. We don't have shareholders. We don't return it to the governing bodies. We don't we don't make a profit. If it's a profit, it goes into the bank and we reinvest it in the infrastructure. That's kind of how our business works. And believe it or not, we are required at the federal level to do exactly what I just described. So there are federal restrictions around how we use our revenue. There are federal prohibitions around what we can and can't do with our revenue. And I won't bore you with the history about how we got there. It's just the nature of the airport system kind of in the U.S. Let's look at so one thing that's may jump out at you, federal grants. Now, when you buy a ticket to get on an airplane, you may or may not be able to find it. It's probably down in the fine print, but there is a percentage of your value of your ticket that goes to the federal government. It goes into an aviation trust fund, at least in theory it's supposed to go in an aviation trust fund. And that trust fund is used to redistribute back to airports like RDU for critical infrastructure. So we have been very fortunate and successful in the last several years to get some significant money out of that trust fund back to build our runway. And I will tell you, if you can do the math, that's about $65 million. Actually, we're sitting here today with about $120 million in federal grants in total. That's just reflective of what we're going to get this year. But that $120 million to pay for a $1 billion runway program, that's a drop in the bucket, and we need more. Yes, ma'am. The federal government, Federal Aviation Administration, through Department of Transportation. Yeah. Let me go to the expense side. Obviously, you can see this. That's our investment in our infrastructure. And that's just cash going out this year. So if you do the math, it's about a $334 million, if I remember, maybe it's 324, this year in terms of cash expenditure. Probably next year and the year after, it'll likely go up to 4 to 450 as we continue to invest in the contracts we got underway and the contracts we will have underway later this year or mid next year, and I'll show you some of that here in a second. But continued investment kind of in our infrastructure moving forward. What does that translate into? It translates into a significant economic impact for Central North Carolina, about a $24 billion economic impact. And you can see the jobs, you can see the tax revenue, and what the numbers that are created by RDU in terms of economic activity as a result of airport operations. One thing that we've been pretty effective doing in the last several years is lobbying our legislature for some of this pot back. And about 4 years ago, we were successful in convincing the legislature to adopt a funding program for airports like RDU. There's 13 of them in North Carolina. We get back about $24 million a year. So think about this. We're giving the state about $1.3 billion a year in tax revenue, and we only get back $24 million. It's a good investment for the state, not a very good investment for us, right? And there are a lot of reasons why that is. But I use that to point out that RDU as an entity has significant economic impact. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, the question was, does that include salaries? It does. It does. So it's salary. It's whatever tax is generated as a result of the airport activity. Yeah. Okay, let me go to air service. I threw this in here just to give you an idea, and Jack and I were talking about it a little bit beforehand. When I first came to RDU, we were doing about 8.5 million annual passengers, and between 2014 and early 2020, we were growing at almost 10% a year. When COVID happened in March of 2020, we lost 96% of our business in 2 weeks. That was a challenging time period. Imagine, like I said, we run a business, right? People have to park. People have to do other things to generate income. So that was a challenging time. It took about 2 years to come out of COVID, but when we came out of COVID, we began to grow again at that 10% rate. So this year we'll probably do around 16 million passengers, almost doubling in 10 years. We project by 2050 we'll be at 30 million. It's just a projection. I will tell you, based on the airlines that are coming into the market, that may happen sooner. So our challenge is really to keep up with the infrastructure. But airlines are coming in and people are traveling because the population is shifting to Central North Carolina. That's what's really driving the growth. And we live in an area of, typically higher than average wages, higher than average education, propensity to travel. People want to move around the country and around the world. And we've got a lot of carriers that offer you a very competitive airfare, right? We've got a very comprehensive and competitive mix of airlines at RDU that are providing service to places people want to go. And that's really why people are traveling. And people are coming from what we call a very large catchment area. This is typically about a 2-hour drive time to RDU, maybe a little bit different to the west because you got Greensboro and then you get into Charlotte. But our catchment area is really large, all the way up into Virginia, down into South Carolina, all the way to the ocean, right? And I would argue even further past Greensboro to the west. So within that catchment area, north of 4 million people who have a propensity to travel. And where are they traveling to today? Today we've got 20 airlines serving 82 direct destinations, 15 of which are international. We have 5 carriers that are providing service to the European market. It's unbelievable for this size of an airport for that to actually work, and it does. And people are filling up the airplanes. They really are. So, you can go north, south, east, or west. There is a lot of interest in going to other destinations. I will tell you, I think we have direct service now to at least our top 20. So you can get to markets virtually all over. You can almost get to where you want to go anywhere in the world, one stop, depending upon where you're going. Some of the larger international destinations, you probably got to stop twice. But it's a good mix of carriers coming in and out of RDU. And 2024 was a record. I think 2025 will be a record again. From an infrastructure perspective, it would be nice if it slowed down a little bit to give the infrastructure a little bit of time to catch up, right? But the reality is we're accommodating it. As we build, it's not going to be easy. Imagine if you're living in your home and you've decided you're going to remodel your kitchen while you're making breakfast. That's really what it's going to be like. It's going to be a challenge for everybody for a certain period of time, and I'll walk you through that here a little bit. But that doesn't mean we're not looking. Our air service marketing team is looking at other international destinations. I suspect in the next 5 to 10 years, we'll probably go from here to the Middle East and into one of the Middle Eastern hubs. Could be Istanbul, that's not Middle East, but it could be there. Could be, Qatar into Doha, Emirates into Dubai, Etihad, less likely into Abu Dhabi, because there is a huge demand to get into the Indian market. And I think you're going to see that at some point in the near term. But there's also other domestic markets that a lot of the carriers are playing around with. I will tell you, you may have seen in the news, Breeze is now becoming a big player at RDU. They're establishing a crew base. They want to add additional flights. Their fleet is growing. I would not be a bit surprised if, I don't know how they describe it, but I would not be a bit surprised if at some point in the future they decide they want a hub and spoke RDU. That will place a huge stress on our infrastructure. Not that it won't work, but it's going to place a huge stress to help them make it work. But good carrier, good service. If you've ever flown them, great fares. They really are. So I'm going to stop at air service for a second before I transition into capital projects. Any questions about air service? Okay, I'm going to keep going. Now, this is really, as Jack described, what my responsibility is. When I came to RDU, I came as the chief operating officer, which included all development. When we came out of COVID and we saw the growth coming back much faster than we thought, when COVID started, we put our capital program on hold. And we were at the point where we could do that easily because we had very few contracts. We were right at the cusp of finishing planning and the environmental, getting ready to start design. It was an easy place for us to stop. But what happened is it put us 4 years behind. So when all that growth came back, we're suddenly faced with, oh my gosh, what are we going to do now? So we reorged our executive team a little bit so I could get out of the operational business and focus more on the development side, which is critically important for us. And we promoted one of my team members to be our chief operating officer, so I can focus 24/7 on nothing but infrastructure. And it is a 24/7 job. One thing I wanted to start with in the discussion about capital projects is the notion of sustainability. Every decision we make in the capital infrastructure realm is through the lens of sustainability. And sustainability in our world, and in the aviation world, fits in 4 different buckets. There's a consideration of the operational impacts, there's a consideration of the economic or financial impacts, there's consideration of the social impacts, and then there's consideration of the environmental impacts. And I will tell you that's not easy in the context of an airport. Trying to balance all of those considerations equally in your decision-making process can be very, very difficult. But that's the lens with which we look through things to make a variety of decisions. I'm going to talk about one project in detail here in a second where through that lens, I think we did an outstanding job, and we've received multiple awards, and I think we're up for a couple of more, but it just illustrates how we kind of look strategically at a variety of projects. So what we did about a year ago is we crafted this, what we're calling Phase 1, $2.5 billion capital investment program. And the centerpiece of that program are these 4 projects. It's our runway, it's our expansion of Terminal 2, it's our roadway system, and it's an expansion of Park Economy 3. Now, I will tell you those 4 projects, they make up about $2.2 billion of that 2.5, and we have likely 100 to 110 other smaller projects. Small meaning 10 million to 20 million, give or take. Some of them a little bit larger, a little bit smaller, of the overall program, right? But I'm just going to focus on these 4. And the centerpiece really, for me and my team, is the construction of a brand new main runway. I talked about the runway's end of life. Runway is also too close to Terminal 2. So when it was built in 1986, the design standards for aviation airport infrastructure were completely different than they are 40 years later. So we had to shift the runway out of the way to not only allow larger design aircraft, but to build gates at Terminal 2 long term. So we're moving it. You can see right now it just looks like a big dirt project, and it is. We have to move 5 million cubic yards of dirt because in some places from the top of the runway, if you were standing on it, to the bottom of where we're putting in fill is 80 feet. Believe it or not, the elevation difference between that end of the runway and that end of the runway is about 40 feet. So it kind of goes like this. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but if you were standing on it, you'd get the point. So we're dealing with an area that's challenging in terms of topography, and we've got a lot of dirt we need to move around. While we're moving it around, we're putting major storm drainage pipes under the runway because we have to drain this entire side of the airfield this way into the Briar Creek Reservoir. So you put in drainage infrastructure. We've got utilities we need to relocate. We're relocating a Duke power feed right here in this location. We're relocating in Raleigh, City of Raleigh sanitary sewer force main. We have navigational aids off the end of both runways that we have to move. Oh, by the way, one of them needs to get moved into the Briar Creek Reservoir, which if you're familiar at all with this area, the Briar Creek Reservoir is a Superfund site, or at least part of a Superfund site, And I'll talk about that in the context of this down here. Well, let me talk about it now. There was a transformer repair business kind of outside the airport boundary that had worked for many, many years called Ward Transformer. What they did is they would drain the old oil out of electrical transformers that were PCB laden, and they'd pour them into the ground. They poured them into a pond behind their operation. Yeah. And that pond with water leached all the way down into Briar Creek and all the way over into Lake Crabtree and a lot of different areas. So in the late 2000s, it became a Superfund site. So believe it or not, in order for us to build this new runway, we had to buy that Superfund site. So fortunately, it was 100% remediated. It had been cleaned up. We didn't take on any liability, but I will tell you, in the context of my career, I never thought I'd buy a Superfund site. But we did. We bought the Superfund site. We're currently buying more property because you can't see it. It's off this. We need to relocate a state highway to get it out of the way of the runway to be able to build it. So we're in that process, and we have to put an approach lighting system out here into the water that's got PCB soils laying on the bottom of the lake. So very, very challenging for us. So this runway currently 10,000 feet long, fully concrete. Concrete is 16 inches thick, and that's going to be important for something I'm going to share with you in a second. 150 feet wide, 16 inch thick, 10,000 feet long. New runway gets built at 10,639 feet. And you may wonder why? That sounds weird. It's weird because the performance of the aircraft dictate a little bit longer runway, especially domestic aircraft going to the West Coast in the middle of the summer. You need additional length to be able to take on more fuel and take on more people and more bags to get into the West Coast. So that's kind of how we came to that number, 10,639. Now, while we're building this runway, and we're expecting to cut the ribbon in June of 2029, and then we'll rebuild the taxiway system, we are maintaining our existing runway by, believe it or not, cutting out 25 by 25 foot, 16 inch deep slabs of concrete and replacing it over a 20-hour period of time. And we've done this about 350 times. And I'm going to show you a video, and I'll kind of narrate it as we go, of how that actually happens. So what you're going to see is American Airlines taking off every night. So they take off and go to London. We get on the runway, we take the concrete out, they put a bunch of rebar and dowels in, they pave it, they clean it all up. And less than 20 hours later, that aircraft lands on that runway and goes over that slab of concrete. Yeah, we've done that 350 times. We're doing it right now as I speak. The runway's closed. So it's the only way we can keep it operational. We've gotten pretty good at it. I hate to say it, but the team's gotten really, really good at it. We use a high early strength concrete to get it to set up. It's very, very challenging. We will do that for probably 3 more years before we open the runway. But could you ever imagine you're going to take off and then we're building a runway while you're coming back? Yeah, very, very challenging for us, but really kind of fun, believe it or not. So talked about runway. One of the reasons why we need to move the runway is because it's too close to Terminal 2, so we can add gates. We're doing a program to expand what we call the land side, which is check-in and bag claim of the facility to be able to accommodate those new gates when we get there. So we're adding north, we're adding south. The existing facility is about 1 million square feet under roof. We're adding 460,000 square feet to that space. It's going to 2.5 times increase the size of international arrival facility. It'll double the size of TSA checkpoint. It'll give us 2 more ticket islands, which gives us about 40% more check-in positions, new baggage handling system, new office space for airlines, and a bunch of others. And this is just kind of an artist illustration of what the checkpoint entrance is going to look like on the south half of the facility. So if you can visualize the last time you were there, you went through TSA screening, and then the exit corridor, when you come back out, it's going to be a mirror image on the other side of the exit corridor. So it will essentially double. And I think I've got a video. I'm going to kind of walk you through, and I'll narrate it as well. So this is a video to really give you a concept of what it's really going to look like. We are obviously sticking with the architectural theme, so it's merely an extension of both sides. Like I said, it's international arrivals on the north. When we get to the south, it's the mirror image on the south. That's our baggage handling facility where the TSA screens luggage before it gets on the airplane. When you walk in, you will see new ticket islands, identical to what they are today. So again, it's the same architectural style. When you get to the south, we didn't put it in here, but there will be a ticket island there. And as you turn here in a second, it'll go into the TSA screening checkpoint. 14 lanes on the north, there will be 14 lanes on the south, again, doubling the capacity. You can kind of what it looks like today, a little bit with the machines in the checkpoint. It'll transition here in a second to the inbound international arrival space. This is it right here. We're going from a facility designed to accommodate 400 passengers an hour to 1,000. It's 2.5 times. And then after you go through, you'll go down into a bag claim area. If you've come in international, you'll notice we've got 1 bag claim. We're going to 3. We need significantly more space for all the international traffic that we're taking. And then as they exit the bag claim facility, much larger, what we call meter greeter, if you're picking somebody up, much larger space to greet your family or friends who are coming internationally. So that's kind of what Terminal 2, yes ma'am. That has been a constant challenge in this community. Recruiting contractors and skilled labor, a constant challenge, yes. We're managing it the best we can. I'm gonna go to roadway system. So we talked a little bit about transit and the importance of bringing more people to the airport on a single vehicle rather than 40 vehicles, bringing 40 different people. We need to improve the capacity of the roadway system between the terminals. It's called John Bradley Boulevard. It's also called a horseshoe, right? If you're familiar, this is where you go into the parking garage. This takes you to Terminal 1, you go around the horseshoe, and this takes you to Terminal 2. So right now, the road is right here. So this graphic is a little busy, but what it effectively means is we are relocating utilities out of the center core here to get them out of the way of the road. We're going to extend the roadway system and build a couple of new bridges to effectively increase the capacity of the road through our projections through 2050. So maybe to make it a little bit easier to understand, we're going to build a new bridge. And that the purpose of that new bridge is today, our international drive comes to a T intersection at John Bradley Boulevard to a, not traffic that's going to the terminal, but people that are trying to get into the terminal, and it stops. It's very, very congested. We're going to deconflict all that. We're going to, if you're going to Terminal 2, you're going to go up and over a bridge, and you're going to back up to arrivals, or back up to departures, or down to arrivals. If you're at Terminal 1, or you don't want to go to Terminal 2, you're going to exit and go north. So it's not a stopped condition anymore, so we can keep flow of traffic. And then if you're going to Terminal 2 or you're exiting, you're going to go upper level for departures, lower level after you go over the bridge for arrivals, or you're exiting and to get out of the way. So we have modeled this extensively. We've projected 30 million passengers by 2050. We're designing and building the roadway capacity for 30 million passengers by 2050. So we think it's a huge and necessary improvement for us as part of our $2.5 billion kind of investment program. And then finally, the last piece of that, those 4 centerpiece projects, is our Park Economy 3 expansion project. So Park Economy 3, originally built by American Airlines as an employee parking lot for their hub operation. When American dehubbed, it kind of transitioned over to public paid parking. And for the longest time, it's been about 3,800 spaces. We are increasing it to 7,000. We are increasing it by 7,000 to almost 11,000 spaces. We're shutting down a couple of others and consolidating them because we need room for employee parking, believe it or not, because of growth. But what we were able to do in the context of sustainability here is avoid all environmental impacts to wetlands and streams. We've got a really kind of interesting shape the parking lot. We designed some stormwater management features that are called submerged gravel wetlands. That's a pilot program. We are collaborating with NC State University to provide better treatment for stormwater runoff in this area. We recently won an award from Envision, first platinum award in the state of North Carolina for this project. We installed LED lighting, we're putting in solar panels for power, we're putting in EV chargers. This is an artist rendition of a customer amenity building that we are currently under construction for. So you can imagine this lot is very, very large, kind of very, very long and linear, a place where you can go get a soda, get a drink of water, use the restroom, if you needed to, going to or from the parking lot. So very important piece of infrastructure for us. So that's the centerpiece of kind of the phase one capital program. And I'm just going to stop here. Key takeaways: economic impact, we're growing for the future, and it's important for all of you to keep coming to fly, right? That's how our business maintains itself. So we're all focused, and my team is focused on really delivering these capital projects over the next 10 years. It's actually a little bit less than that, assuming we can find the workforce to be able to get it done, right? Which I think will be there. It's going to be a challenge. So a lot going on at RDU. I certainly appreciate your attention. Thank you for your interest, and I am happy to answer more questions. Yes, go ahead. No, no. No different than it is today. Yeah, but what it does though is you'll avoid congestion, because I'm sorry, let me get to the one that, so you will drop somebody off at Terminal 1 here, right? You'll come through, you'll go under the bridge, and you'll already be set up in the left lane, and you'll just be able to exit. You won't have to go by, hopefully, in any of the curb fronts. Go ahead, I'll get you. Sure. So question was, what's the acreage and how do we acquire new property? The acreage is just under 5,000 total acres, and we acquire property like any other unit of government would. You know, we are acquiring property right now for our runway program. We are required by federal law to follow a certain acquisition process, and that acquisition process requires us to do certified appraisals. So we hire an appraiser to go out and do a fair market value analysis. They would render an opinion. That opinion has to be reviewed by what's called a review appraiser to determine whether or not there's the one that establishes value, right? And then when that value is established, that's the basis for our offer of acquisition. But I will tell you, in the context of, at least for us, when, in the case of the runway, when we have a need, what we tell the property owner essentially is, and I had our board pass a resolution of necessity, we're going to buy the property or we're going to eminent domain it from you. So it's under threat of condemnation, essentially. That's really the power of government, and assuming you have it under the laws of your individual state. But that really, in this case, it's necessary. We don't have a choice. So so far, for all the acquisitions that I've done since I've been here, and the ones most recently, we've been able to negotiate everything. We have not filed eminent domain, but we're not done yet. So it's worked very, very well for us. But I will tell you, in the context of the broader strategic piece of property at RDU, save for the runway program, and when we get done, I don't see a need to buy any more property. You know, we can live within the confines of what we've got for a very, very long time, and use the property effectively for the purpose for which the legislature told us we needed to use the property. So that's kind of how we buy, right? Yes, ma'am. Yeah, so the question was, is RDU the largest? It's not. Charlotte is. And interesting enough, if you do a side-by-side comparison, the only reason Charlotte is larger is because it's an American Airlines hub. Because they transfer probably 80% of the traffic that goes through Charlotte. You never park, you just transfer, right? So that's really the distinction. The other part of the question was, with smaller airports, how does the operations that may or may not be increasing or decreasing affect RDU? I will tell you, we don't pay that much attention to that. We really don't. Trust me when I say we have our hands full running the business of RDU rather than worrying about smaller airports. But in some cases, and let me answer that a little bit differently, because there's a state aviation plan, right? And I think there are 108 airports in North Carolina, 13 of which are commercial service. The others are just general aviation. You know, I talk 100% about commercial aviation in this presentation. I talk nothing about general aviation. You may find this interesting. You know, there are probably, let me do the math in my head, 700 aircraft operations a day at RDU. Probably more than half of those are non-airline. They're general aviation. Corporate jets, flight training, helicopters, you name it. It's all GA. And you know, a lot of the smaller airports that are not the commercial service, the 13 I mentioned, they're 100% general aviation. So the system of airports, let's say in the Raleigh-Durham area that are all GA, that's a benefit to RDU because that traffic's not coming to RDU, right? We have all the infrastructure to really handle the commercial side of the business, but we cannot prohibit the smaller general aviation aircraft from using RDU. I could make an economic argument that said, okay, this small Cessna that has one person on it is occupying a certain amount of airspace. Is that more valuable than an airplane with 300 people on it? I think you could come to your own conclusion. So what I think will happen over time is as RDU gets busier and the airspace gets busier, these small general aviation pilots will move to other smaller airports. That's the value of a system, but we don't control it. We don't. I'll go to Jack first and then I'll come back there. Go ahead.
Your FBO operation.
Yeah, so Jack's question and comment was there's a huge difference between commercial fees and general aviation fees, and you're right. Because believe it or not, at RDU, we don't charge GA at all. The only way that they pay a fee is if they buy fuel. There'll be a couple of cents, what we call flowage fee on fuel that goes into the airplane. But I'll give you an example. Let me try and do the math in my head. A 737 landing at RDU would likely be charged, let's say $150 for the privilege of landing. If somebody landed in a Cessna 152, they don't get charged anything. So there is an economic disparity between the general aviation community system-wide across the U.S. and the commercial airline community. And I will tell you, we are wrestling with that concept right now because there's an inequity there, right? And there's a very effective lobby in Washington that represents small aircraft owners and operators that is very, very good at trying to keep airports from charging small aircraft for user fees at airports. They believe they pay enough into the system and for registration fees and things like that, that they shouldn't be charged by an airport operator. That economic model doesn't work any longer. So I'm gonna go to the back. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, so the question was anything we can do to ameliorate delays. Delays are caused by a variety of factors, right? They're caused by saturation of the air traffic control system, they're caused by weather, they're caused by inability of infrastructure to handle the demand. I will tell you, you know, right now today, we have our main runway closed for the replacement program I'm talking about. When you have 2 runways that are handling about 450 commercial airline operations a day and you go down to 1, you're going to take delays. So there are a variety of ways to ameliorate the delays. You're not going to eliminate them, but infrastructure is a big part of that. And we take very seriously planning around changing any of our operational dynamics on the airfield because it affects airline operations. So that is a huge challenge, right? So let's talk about what you haven't asked me. So what is today? October the 20th? So we're 20 days into the federal shutdown, give or take? I'm shocked that we haven't had a significant impact on the air traffic control system. But I will tell you that the system is taking delays today because the fact that our air traffic controllers are not getting paid, and they're calling in sick. They're voting with their feet. Our elected officials in Washington, they really need to get their act together. But because at some point, it's going to get to a point where I believe it will shut down the air traffic control system if you don't have enough people to operate it safely. We're not there yet, but it's certainly headed in that direction, and that's part of the delay piece. I'm going to go here. I'll come back. Yes, sir, go ahead. Yeah, thank you for that. Let me explain that a little bit. So the question was, any way to improve the drop-off, I think you said drop-off experience? Yeah, one of the challenges, let me go to this one. One of the challenges we have, Terminal 1 is right-sized. Terminal 1 works, unless there's something screwy going on. I mean, the roadway system and the curb front system and the terminal, they're right-sized for each other. That works. What's not right-sized is Terminal 2, and let me tell you why. When the original terminal was built on that site, it was an American Airlines hub operation. And 90% of the traffic that came through that facility never touched the roadway system. So when American Airlines built it back in the 80s, the Airport Authority didn't build it. It was all financed and built by American Airlines. So they built the roadway and curbside infrastructure to handle 10% of the traffic that was coming through that facility. Now, fast forward to where we are today. 99.9% of the traffic that goes through Terminal 2 touches the roadway system. That's our problem. So what we're doing is I'll tell you, we're going to fix it, but it's going to be very painful to do that. So what we're actually doing, you can see this right here. This is really the pinch point for this terminal. So what happens is when you're dropping somebody off, you go onto this upper level bridge to get to a curb to drop somebody off. What you don't see is what's underneath. What's underneath is very constrained. So for about a 2-year period of time, we're going to rebuild this bridge, and you're not going to be able to get to the upper level of Terminal 2 for about 2 years. We're going to increase it by 600 feet in length to fix that issue for us and fix the lower level roadway system. So we're right in the middle of having some very interesting conversations about where are we going to put people. We've got some good solutions, but it will be different. And to your point about airports being in a constant state of construction, we're going to be in a constant state of construction for the next 10 years. There is no question about it. We're going to fix that issue. Either one of you.
I noticed you said there would be no expansion of the number of gates. Did I understand correctly?
The next 10 years, you are correct.
Well, already there are delays because a gate may be occupied when your plane comes in. So how will that work with this dramatic expansion of the number of passengers?
Yeah, great question. So the easy answer is if the airlines are always on schedule, it works. Because remember I said when we plan our schedule 60 days in advance and we allocate that infrastructure. So when we allocate a gate to an airline, so it departs, we give a 20-minute buffer between a departure and an arrival. There's plenty of time to do that. So if the airlines are always on time, and we know they're not, right, then it works. Second piece of that is, I Talked about the common use infrastructure. I can put any airplane on any gate, size restrictions, at any point in time. Believe it or not, airlines won't do that. So if you've got an airline sitting on a gate that's delayed and one coming in, they will likely have the availability to go right next door, but they won't do that because they don't have the equipment in place. They don't want to pay the extra fee associated with that. And that's, I hate to say it, that's really their operational decision and not ours. That's the flight crew deciding what they're going to do. It's unfortunate, but I think probably the two complaints we get from travelers the most are, why does it take so long to get my luggage? And then how come I'm sitting on an airplane for 30 minutes and I can see a gate open, but I'm going into this gate? 100% the airlines. Not within our operational control. So, yes, sir. So the question was, would AI help reduce our growth or our ability to respond to growth? Yeah. I think what AI is doing for us, it's making us a little bit more efficient as professionals to allow us to do more with less. That's about the thing that I see right now. I think it'll also maybe allow you to be a little bit more savvy traveler to the extent that you can be. But in some respects, time will tell what AI does. We're starting to see some of the bad sides of AI in terms of a variety of fake videos that people are putting out, which could create security issues. I mean, there's the whole bad side to AI. But I think we're just really now starting to see some of the benefit. And I'm not sure I really have my hands around what's next, but I think we're going to rely on it a lot coming forward, especially for things like draft me a standard contract with these terms. In 30 seconds, you're done, right? As opposed to we'll still need lawyers, don't get me wrong, as opposed to going to a lawyer and having them spend 2 days, give me a standard form contract that I just need somebody to review. Things like that will make us more efficient. Anybody else? I think there was a question in the back. No, you're good? Yes, sir, go ahead. Yeah, so the question was, Boston has a satellite, what I'll call ground transportation center, where you can get picked up and drop off. Have we talked about anything like that? The answer is yes. And really, I think we've talked about it in the context of, the infrastructure, even though we're planning for 2050, it's a box, and the box is never going to get any bigger. So how do we accommodate growth? And growth will continue. What's interesting about growth in terms of a terminal building is, the terminal building infrastructure hasn't really changed. And I'll give you an example. A gate, doesn't matter what it is, a gate was likely designed for 120 passengers, but as aircraft have increased in size, an airline may put a 150 or 170 or 190 passengers on that same gate, so it gets more crowded. So my point is, it takes a lot to change the infrastructure to respond to other people's business decisions, but we are looking at exactly that. Do we need to develop a remote ground transportation center that could, as an example, be serviced by frequent buses to and from to get people away from the terminal environment, get cars off our roadway system, right, and make the operation more efficiently? We are exactly talking about that right now. One more question. Yes, ma'am, go ahead. Okay, so the question was, you've seen signs that say stop RDU from annexing bike paths. Yeah. So let me give you I'll give you the real story, right? As opposed to, our general counsel always reminds me, she says, my grandfather used to tell me, let's don't let the facts get in the way of a good story. So I'm going to tell you the facts. So the facts are this. The facts are, I talked about the airport authority is about 5,000 acres. The boundary of the airport authority, of the airport, hasn't changed, other than a little bit of stuff that we're doing on the runway on the north end. But the boundary along Umstead Park hadn't changed in decades, right? We have no interest in acquiring any Umstate Park property, none whatsoever. What we have been battling for a very, very long time, predated me, is what I will call, they call themselves something, I'm going to call them trespassing mountain bikers on airport authority property. That had been going on for years, right? We got to the point where it became such a liability problem for us because we've had several injuries on airport authority property, on unsanctioned trails, on folks who clearly see a no trespassing sign, but they ignore it. And we've had to take folks out by ambulance before. So we got to a point where we were getting ready to, believe it or not, erect a fence and keep people off airport authority property, for liability reasons. Fortunately, that didn't happen. Fortunately, we were able to work with Wake County to allow them to lease property from the airport authority to develop a mountain bike park. So now it's legally authorized. It's part of the Wake County park system. And bear in mind, if you go back and look at our enabling legislation, it doesn't say park. We're not a park. We run an airport. So we've been able to, and we leased about 156 acres to Wake County to do that. They're also, my understanding, is gonna I don't know if they're leasing it or they're just gonna have an operating agreement. They're gonna use part of Umstead Park for mountain biking. And then you may have seen kind of in the press recently that Lake Crabtree has been a big topic of conversation. There is a portion of Lake Crabtree that will always remain as a park. That's not going away. It's the portion of the park that's kind of in a lower area that's undevelopable, but there is a portion of the park, what I would call in the uplands area, that is developable. And the airport authority went out for a request for proposals to develop a recreational destination kind of thing. And here, I put some slides at the end in case I got a question about that. Just kind of give you an idea of what it looks like. I won't do that, I won't do that. So it could be a fantastic recreational destination, which could include mountain biking, it could include kayaking and rafting and swimming and food and beverage retail. It is a great concept for that area. Now let me tell you the kind of the backstory behind part of one of the reasons why we're doing that is, remember in the beginning, we have to be financially self-sustaining. We run a business, and part of the way we run a business is we have to use the property that is within the ownership and control of the airport authority to generate income, because that's how we fund the infrastructure. So that becomes an important part of our business model. If we don't do things like this, you may have parked for 50, but a year from now it may go to 70, and then it may go to 90, and it may go to something else. You're going to pay for it some way or another, because we don't print money. We're not the federal government. We don't do that. So we got to generate it some way. So we try and find unique opportunities to develop income streams for the airport. This is an income stream for the airport, long term. I'm not going to argue with you there. It's a little bit different kind of park, right? A park that's not free, a park that generates income for the airport authority. Yeah, so that's kind of, but thank you for that question, right? Okay, thank you very much, everybody. I appreciate it. Come see us at RDU. Any closing comments?
It's so funny.
Thank you.